So, welcome to another session of Just Me podcast. And today we are joined by the fabulous Paul Pook. Paul, over to you. Who are you? Obviously, we know who you are because we just said your name. But what is it that you do, and what's your journey been to where you are today?
Well, if I just briefly summarize where I am today, I find myself as CEO and founder of Tackle 360 and Tackle Suicide. Tackle Suicide is a suicide prevention initiative aligned to sport and contact sports. I think that a lot of people are aware of the current sort of narrative around rugby, football, and to some extent other sports regarding concussion and brain injury. So a big part of the initiative is brain health. And we realize that in terms of suicide risk, brain injury is a major risk factor amongst many other factors. So I was very quick to point out that it's colliding variables. There's factors like transition from sport, the variables that sadly leave someone to take their own life are very unique. But there are nuances. For example, elite athletes have a higher mental ill health risk than non-athletes, and contact sport athletes an increased risk because of the association between concussion, brain injury, and mental health. So if I go back to my childhood, rugby was a massive part of my life. After school, you'd rush to get changed up on the field with the lads, kicking the ball, kicking all sorts of balls, not just rugby and cricket. It was just, I always look back and think, like as a 10-year-old, watching the Six Nations on TV with the curtains pulled with a couple of my mates, and seeing people outside walking to the shops, I could never comprehend why they weren't watching the rugby, because it was just that, such a huge part of the culture in Wales. And I suppose rugby's at a very sensitive, well, lots of industries and sports are in a delicate situation at the moment because the impact of COVID. There's all sorts of factors affecting sport. But we're also mindful that we love sport. We are pro sport. We are very much pro rugby. As a result of my childhood, and if I just flick through my career, I started playing at school with my mates at number 8. I was quite good. I remember seeing a school report when I was about 12 a few weeks ago that said, Paul has represented his school in sport with honours. And I suppose it was not only part of the culture, but for me, because I had a pretty dysfunctional childhood. My father was alcoholic. My mum left him when I was about 8 or 9. She took me with her, which was totally out of the blue, unexpected. A few months later, I ran away from living with her back to him. And a year or two later, persuaded to go back to her because it just wasn't healthy for me to live with my father. God bless him. So rugby became a sort of pathway for me to sort of build my self-esteem as well as friendships and teamwork. So when I was 18, 19, I loved exercise and sport. So going to Cardiff Met University, which was then called South Morgan Institute, to study human movement. It's a term we don't hear very often these days, but it's essentially a mix of sports science, sort of physiology, and lots of practical. It was a very practical degree because it was preparing us to be PE teachers, but that wasn't for me. Most of my friends stayed on and did PGCE. I left and ended up going to play rugby professionally before it was professional. Played for Wales students against England students up in Hartlepool. And post-match, this is 1990, yeah, 1990. The coaches and sort of sponsors of the club approached me post match and said, "Would you like to come up here next season and play for us? And we'll get you a job, get you accommodation."
Wow.
And I thought about it, and when the summer came, it was a brave thing to do. As like a 21-year-old, um, going north, not to rugby league, but to Hartlepool to play rugby um, for a team that was developing rapidly. They went from the third division, second division, into the first division of England rugby in consecutive years.
Wow.
After 2 years in Hartlepool, I not only missed sort of friends and family back in South Wales, but my ambition to play rugby for Wales was a big pull. So I moved back to South Wales after 2 years.
Wow. And in terms of, I mean, it was something you mentioned there, you said that rugby was your pathway in terms of your friends and all the rest of it. Was it a kind of a safe space for you in terms of because of your mum and your dad and that kind of turmoil that you were going through? Was it something you could identify with and say, actually, no, this is where I feel safe and connected?
I'm pretty sure it wasn't a conscious
Mm.
awareness of that at the time, but on reflection, and the more time I spend speaking to former players, current players, and our Tackle Suicide initiative, I realized the importance of that connection, that brotherhood, that
Yeah.
team spirit, that sort of collective purpose. And of course, it was very social, you know, as a 19, 20-year-old, rugby would involve, drinking games afterwards, pub crawls, part and parcel of the system was great fun, great social life. And also, I never forget when I was first selected for the first team at university, because they were regarded as probably the strongest university team in the UK. It's where Gareth Edwards went, and
Wow.
John and some other famous players. It was a real honour to be picked in my first year as a student there, play with, you know, established players that were, playing for Neath on the weekends and getting into, getting some honours. So yeah, to answer your question, on reflection, 100%. And as a result, when you leave a sport, whether you're professional or amateur, because of injury or age or other factors, it's aligned to leaving the military. Not entirely the same, clearly, but someone said to me recently when I did a talk at Mind, you train to be a soldier, but you're not untrained to be a civilian.
Wow.
Same context, you're trained to be a rugby warrior, but then you're not untrained to not be a rugby warrior.
Wow.
So, I think as a result, there's evidence that post-career rugby players struggle if they can't keep that connection, or even that sort of avenue to release anger,
Mm.
frustration. I mean, I wouldn't call it legalized violence, but you go on the field back in the day and you'd be, hitting lumps out of each other, then shaking hands, having a hug, and a beer afterwards.
Mm.
And you can't do that in the street. So, yeah, it's fascinating.
And why do you think people struggle with that? Because the thing is interesting, isn't it? So your kind of your junior career was all about rugby, wasn't it? All about focus of sport. And then you get to your professional career, which is going fantastic. And then that starts to end because of age or whatever it is.
Mm.
And as you say, that's almost just like that's your identity, or it's a sports person's identity, same as a military person. And then you get to the end of that, and it's like, as you say, you can't untrain or retrain to become a civilian. It just stops, doesn't it? And for some people, it can be it's quite a cliff edge, isn't it? It's like 1 minute you're playing for Harlequins or whoever that is, and the next minute you're not. So all of that support mechanism of coaches and everything else just ends. So why has
Yeah.
it become so difficult to adapt? Is it because there are no pathways laid out for people?
I must highlight that there are now pathways. There's some great
Brilliant.
initiatives out there, some charities like Switch to Play, a charity
Okay.
dedicated to helping players transition. There are
Brilliant.
player associations in rugby. Um, but but they have their hands tied to some extent, because if I go into my life sort of towards the end of playing rugby and I transition into coaching, I literally stopped playing professional rugby for a team one day. The next day, I was the head of strength and conditioning. So I went from being one of the lads to like telling them what to do. And the way I saw it, if I could, endure that and learn from that, then I could deal with lots of environments.
Wow.
So that was challenging, but also, a very steep learning curve. So that was for 2 years at Abervale. Then I was approached by Harlequins, and it was going from one extreme to another. So Abervale, a team of boxers, not street fighters, but there were a few people, renowned for their skills in those bouncers and so forth. A very down to earth working class group of guys, And then I went to Harlequins. I think there was one public school player at Abervale. When Harlequins, I think there was only one that wasn't a public school player. It was that extreme in terms of the contrast.
Wow.
But great people. But what was unusual for me, consider what I said about a 10-year-old supported Wales. When I went and played rugby for West Hartlepool as a Welshman, I would be motivated because I'd be playing against English players.
Right.
But of course, my team were English, but it still was like a fundamental part of my drive to perform and I suppose represent my country to some extent. And then at Harlequins, the Champagne Charlie sort of stereotype, for me to adapt to that was also very educational.
I bet.
Because that middle class sort of stereotype. My father was a miner, my grandfather was a miner, dented the aristocracy, So I think the more I dug into my sort of character and DNA, if you like, I realized that things come from my ancestors, like my grandfather. I recently found out that he really resented the sort of middle class people who were making money from the mines but didn't have any duty of care place. And he passed away in his early 50s from the lung disease caused by the dust. So yeah, it fascinates me that one, have the awareness of sort of the different environments and learn from them, but also accept that the stereotypes aren't always true. It's like I worked in Russia for like 4 years. Great people, but of course, everyone thinks they're just Putin clones, but they're not. It's a wonderful people in Russia.
Wow.
I'm in contact with a few now, and they're very disillusioned, but because they are sort of put in a box, if you like. Sort of moving on. After a couple of seasons at Harlequins, where life was great. I mean, I was getting well paid, lived in a lovely house, happily married, beautiful baby daughter. I started to have sort of low mood and low energy. What I haven't mentioned is towards the end of my career, I was also having some sort of petty mild seizures, which I now know were very likely linked to concussions. I had several significant concussions, and brain scans have showed that I had a 15 millimeter brain hemorrhage playing rugby, because I've never had a car accident or any other head trauma outside of rugby. So if you like, in the late 90s, I played rugby on a Saturday, had a brain hemorrhage, and then on the Monday was asked, Pookie, you okay for next week, weren't you? And I played the following week because that was the culture. But of course, they didn't know there was a hemorrhage. They knew there was a concussion, but because of the culture and sort of lack of duty of care and awareness, then we just cracked on. Whereas today, I'm really pleased to say that would never happen.
Yeah,
I hope it would happen, even at amateur level, where there isn't, the club doctor or whatever. I'd love to think now that the risk is far less. And rugby is a wonderful sport. Wonderful. It's been great for me in my career, and the interventions in place now are hopefully going to give it strength and longevity. So yeah, and that sort of depression escalated in the sort of my early years of Harlequins, and then I was referred to a psychotherapist and a CBT and medicated and antidepressant, and it did work initially. But then, if I summarize the 20 years since then, it's been a mix of real dark sort of suicidal phases. If I use like a 1 to 10 scale, with 1 being suicidal, 10 being manic, if people relate to that in terms of the bipolar spectrum, then yeah, at least 2/3 of that 20 years I've been, three, 3 or 4 with phases of 1, never near 10. Um,
Wow.
and that's another thing which I'm open to address, is the fact that after a few years and going on medication, coming off, you get fluctuations in mood. If you come off medication cold turkey, you will get fluctuations. As a result, those fluctuations were interpreted as bipolar. So then you go from an antidepressant to lithium or another medication because of fluctuations. In my mind, the medication led to the symptoms.
Wow.
To what extent the brain injury led to my low mood and symptoms. In the neurologist's words, I had disrupted emotional circuitry as a result of the concussions and brain hemorrhage, because the hemorrhage is in front right cortex, the area where I think the regulated mood is. So yeah, I think it's a mix of dysfunctional childhood, brain trauma, medication, and then the environment. Things go great. Like I got a contract with a Russia snowboard team, and that sort of snapped me out of a depression. 8 athletes, prepped them for 2 years pre-Sochi Olympics. Ended up with a thank letter from Putin, and one athlete got 2 gold, another a bronze.
Wow.
So yeah, I suppose a roller coaster would describe it, but mostly on the low part of the roller coaster rather than the high.
So you've now set up an organization, haven't you, to help people? And are you specifically looking at rugby, or are you helping kind of people in general in the sports world?
Yeah, it's rugby led, but it's sport in general, because we tend to say contact sports because of the risk of concussion. But I know, cyclists and badminton players and golfers that have had concussion. So it's a bit of a grey area in terms of saying it's contact sport only. So if I go back to early June this year, I started to feel well. There were some major parts of the puzzle that were connecting. I was having some exceptional psychotherapy. I was doing a lot of work on myself. I do like a 1-hour conscious connected breathwork session with intention. Brilliant. And then reflect on my divorce, or reflect on my childhood, or sort of dig deep. And yeah, there's sort of, I felt slow but gradual upward shift in my mood and energy. And then a few things happened, and it was synchronicity. I remember walking out of a yoga class, and this lady next to me, it was her first class, said, "Oh, that was awesome. I loved that." And we got chatting, and she'd just come back from Australia, having done a Winston Churchill Fellowship exploring suicide prevention and sort of post-prevention approaches in Australia to bring back to the UK. The Churchill Fellowship's all about. It funds you to go to a country to bring back.
Brilliant.
Disseminate in the UK. And I thought, wow, that's fascinating. Because the suicide thing was like, I sort of embraced it, and then I decided to hide it. I embraced it in terms of there's a Guardian article like 3.5 years ago, and then a year ago I asked them to remove the article, because I thought, well, if I want to find a partner and a job, people Google Paul Pook, functional suicidalist. Okay, you don't really want that in your CV. And then couple of days after that chat with the suicide prevention lady, I thought, you know what? I'm an authentic,
Yeah.
open
Yeah.
human being, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
Contacted the Guardian and the BBC because they'd taken down a similar article and said, please put it back up online. And then there was a very sad story regarding a Maori rugby player called Shane
Mm,
Christie,
mm,
who took his own life.
mm.
And that was, a full back page article in the Sunday Times by David Walsh. And because I'm part of the brain injury litigation, which is ongoing between players and the governing bodies, I have contacts that have insights to what's happening amongst players globally. And Shane's story was particularly disturbing, and as a result, became a major driving force behind my decision to launch Tackle Suicide.
Right.
And then the more I researched, the more people I spoke to, because there were a few other people I played rugby with that had taken their lives in the last 10 years. And, a lot of us say it didn't make sense. Well, that in itself tells a story. We wear a mask. No one knew I was suicidal. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
um, for example, my brother never knew for 20 years that I was struggling because I could hide it. I was living in France, coming to Ireland, you know. So I reached the decision then, I think the first week in September, to launch Tackle Suicide. I did a few LinkedIn posts, got some amazing traction, like 200,000 views
Amazing. Yeah.
and hundreds of likes and comments. And then I got an email from a Lieutenant Colonel Susie Hines. I think this sort of gives insight to the impact my chairman lived experience was having. She said, Paul, I love what you're doing. I want to help you. I want to join Tackle Suicide. Having had 30 years leading the sort of mental health and suicide prevention within the military,
Mm,
responsible for 100,000 personnel, I'm like, whoa, you know. And since then, there's been, dozens of people offering help. So within a space of 4 months, I now have 5 co-leads who will soon become directors of our CIC. We have about 20 people on our advisory board. We've got 3 professors, psychotherapists, CEOs of companies. We have Sir John Kerwin, who's the
wow.
mental health
Yeah.
in New Zealand, former
Wow.
All Black, is our
Yeah.
global ambassador. We're about to announce one of the most decorated female rugby players of all time as our female global rugby ambassador. We have a few Olympic ambassadors, a
Wow.
wrestler who won gold that I worked with. We have Mark Rowan, who won 2 Paralympic golds in London, who I
Oh,
worked with. So I clearly leveraged I suppose, not my former life, but it does feel that way because life is so different now. So I've reached out to these people, and they're just, you know,
how lovely.
they're, they're more than happy to help because everyone, from governing bodies to
Mm,
friends to athletes I worked with in the past, grassroots clubs, you have to endorse and support an initiative that's about
mm,
raising hope and saving lives.
That's wonderful. And in terms of, so how might people get involved? In other words, if I'm a sports person, whatever I'm doing, might be young, might be old, how do I get involved? Because, I mean, you said it there, you wear a mask, don't you? You hide it, your brother didn't know. And people just get on, don't they? They get up, and however hard their day is, they never, I mean, no one ever says, oh, I'm feeling suicidal, because as soon as people do, it becomes stigma, all that kind of stuff. How do people get involved if they want to learn more from you, Paul? Or how do they get some practical tips and tools just to keep going?
Sure, yeah. I think first and foremost, if people are in crisis, then there are lots of support out there. We're not a crisis support
Yes. Okay.
platform, so whenever I do shared, lived experience and the suicide behaviours mentioned, then every time refer people to Samaritans and with a number. And
Brilliant.
there are some amazing charities out there now. there are so many different initiatives and charities related to mental health, mental health,
Yeah.
men's clubs, that there's someone and some organization near you. So that's why there needs to be like a hub. And I know the Royal Foundation are focusing on creating this hub of
Brilliant.
sort of go to support locally and nationally. And we, as Tackle 360 and Tackle Suicide, when we launch our website, we'll have a global network of
Right.
signposting.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so to answer your question, if people in crisis, Samaritans, they're just wonderful people.
Yeah.
And I'm actually doing a talk with them with my colleague, psychotherapist Lauren Vickery, in about 5 or 6 weeks in London. Now, if we put it into context of, for example, a former professional rugby player who played for his country, recently retired, and he says to me, Paul, I've seen like social media posts about early onset dementia, brain injury, motor neuron disease. There's lots of fear and confusion. And he's thinking, well, what can I do to mitigate my risk? Because I had lots of concussions. Well, firstly, just because you had concussions doesn't equal neurological disorders or depression. Certainly not sort of suicidality.
Of course.
But my response to him was, well, we are building an online platform for people like you to go to where they'll get independent advice, support,
Brilliant.
interventions, signposting
Brilliant.
in that context of, all right, I'm a contact sport athlete. What is the current, thinking around CTE and concussion? People watch the film Concussion with Will Smith and
Yeah.
heightens fear, but then the governing bodies sort of imply that there's no association, so that dilutes the fear. So there's this sort of mix of, one side of the fence, rugby is too dangerous, versus, nah, crack on, we've always known the risks.
Yeah.
So there's some denial. Part of that denial is, there's players out there struggling, but maybe they're struggling because they drank too much, they didn't look after themselves, which is unfair. If you're diagnosed with a brain injury based on scans, scans don't lie. Based on symptoms, like for example, me wet in the bed and having seizures and
Wow.
evidence of a hemorrhage.
Wow.
And then some people in the rugby community suggest that it's more of a lifestyle thing that's caused this.
Okay.
Right? And you're already feeling depressed and low. That's a risk for suicide. You're being dismissed.
Yes.
Despite evidence.
Yes.
Like, come on now. They're either in denial or it's a coping mechanism. So I mentioned David Walsh earlier and his one-page article about Shane Christie and his sad suicide. I recently had an interview with David Walsh about my background and Tackle Suicide Initiative. And during our discussion, it was evident that there are people coping with this issue by blaming the lifestyle of players or questioning the lifestyle of players, questioning the legality of claims, saying that, oh, it's just for money and stuff like this. I mean, neurologists, they're not going to make stuff up, whether it's part of litigation or part of an RFU initiative that's doing some advanced brain health work. I could go out on a limb and say, well, maybe, people implying there's a bias. Well, the bias works both ways.
Absolutely.
If there's those that are in denial and those that are accepting, then. But for me, the key point here is rugby saves lives. Rugby is a wonderful sport.
Lovely.
Rugby is safer now. Rugby gives a lot more than it takes away. And it's the colliding variables that can lead to the worst case scenario of suicide. Not a simple case of you've had a brain injury, therefore you're going to be suicidal. brain injury is a major risk factor for suicide behavior.
Yeah.
But there's other factors. There's neurodiversity. There's other risk factors like construction workers are sadly a high risk group. So I like to sort of put that parallel.
Wow.
Rugby and contact sport and sport is a higher risk group compared to the general population.
Gotcha. And in terms of your vision for Tackle 360, Tackle Suicide, where would you like that to go in terms of the next year, few years?
So, well, first of all, I'd love to think that everybody gets behind it. I'm looking forward to meeting the CEO of Leeds Rhinos and the CEO of Rugby League Cares this Saturday in Leeds and their support staff to discuss partnership. I'd like to think there'll be similar meetings in rugby union, but I must question the fact that some significant people in the rugby union world have said, Paul, I love this. Paul, this is great. Paul, it's amazing the team now you've got behind you. And I replied and said, right, come on, let's sit down and chat and let's look at how we can collaborate. And they go very quiet.
Wow.
And I'm like, well, be careful because the David Walters of this world will chase you down because we're not blaming rugby. We're not pointing fingers. We just want them to endorse what we're doing.
Brilliant.
Even if it's just a quote. Better still, when we launch our global survey, the world first, we want to be endorsed by governing bodies so people engage. When we launch our website, we want to be endorsed by governing bodies, player associations, so more people engage. The more they engage, the more hope, the less suicide.
And if I could ask you, what one word would you describe yourself with? What would that be?
I was bursting into tears then. I'd say grateful.
Oh,
honestly.
Beautiful word.
Mm.
It's a beautiful word. And the thing is, I mean, I've known you for a few years, and the thing is, what I love about you is that you've taken all the kind of the tough, because it is a grisly stuff, isn't it? Some of the stuff you've been through, but you've used it as a force for good, haven't you? And you've kept chipping away, and now you found something with Tackle 360, Tackle Suicide, which is just immense, isn't it? It's almost giving you that spark, that kind of energy to kind of go, come on.
Energy has been my, I'd craved energy for so long, diagnosed with chronic fatigue and, and exercise is my medicine, and not being able to exercise. And people look at you and say, oh, but you look so fit. I mean, yeah, but no. 8 months ago, or within the last year, I couldn't walk 15 minutes to the local camp without stopping 2 times on the bench. Last weekend, I did the 24-hour cycle race. So, is it a miracle? Well, what it tells me and hopefully others is that there's always hope.
That's so beautiful.
Solution is very personal. Starts with support and connecting and also, self-respect and self-love. Once you've killed the poisonous guilt and shame and from losing your identity, as an Olympic coach and a Mr. Fitness to being on benefits and not be able to exercise, that's like a vicious circle.
It's tough. That's hugely tough.
And then now I find myself in a virtuous circle where everything I'm doing is sort of feeding other parts of my life.
Yes. Yeah.
My relationship with my fiance, my children, my friends, family, and Tackle 360, Tackle Suicide is like the best medicine. And the people that are working beside me and behind me are like, wow, these are just wonderful people and top of their game. So, so we will be successful as an initiative. That's for sure.
I love what you just said there about self-respect and self-love, but also those 3 words, there's always hope. I think that is just like, wow. Paul Pook, thank you so much. So lovely to see you again. Lovely to talk to you, and thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. Thank you.